Oh, that's not Jenny, that's Hillary. Jenny not coming tonight.
Welcome to the February briefing session. I'd like to acknowledge the past and present traditional owners of the land on which we gather to conduct this meeting and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Apologies, we have two apologies tonight, Councillor McWilliam and Councillor Carter. Also, one of the directors, Mr. Adams, will be joining us later, so he is going to be late to the meeting. I don't believe we've got any other apologies. No, okay. Declarations of interest, councillors. Any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Announcements. I'd just like to make mention of the skate park competition that will be happening on the 4th of March. It's open to young people of all abilities, and it's for scooter, skateboard and BMX enthusiasts. If you'd like some information, please contact the town or youth services, and I would be loving to see some councillors enter the competition. No, okay, no takers. Petitions, item 5. We have a petition re the sandpit play area at Alf Faulkner Hall. This petition has been circulated to all councillors. There is a officer recommendation. However, did we want to have a comment about this from the officer? Or?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as you can see from the officer recommendation, the matter as it pertains to the Eden Hill Sparks facility and the sandpit issue there is addressed as part of the mid-year review, which is a separate item on the same agenda. So it's simply a recommendation from staff that Council accept the petition and note that matters dealt with elsewhere on the agenda, and then Council can make a decision on the matter as part of the mid-year review.
Okay. Are there any questions, councillors, before we move on? Okay, so we have an officer recommendation that Council receives the petition submitted by Sparks Eden Hill in relation to the sandpit at Alf Faulkner Hall, and 2 notes that the matter is proposed to be considered as part of the 2022-23 mid-year review as addressed by a separate report in this agenda. Do I have a mover? Briefing session. Briefing session. Sorry, apologies. Okay, I'm ahead of myself, councillors. Apologies.
Bit of a big break. That's okay.
We'll move on to item 6, which is statements by members of the public. We allow 2 minutes per person for a statement on any item on the agenda. If you come up to the microphone and please state your name and address and provide your statement. Would anyone like to? Okay.
Hello, my name is Sue Conway, and my name is Sue Conway, and I live at 119 Wilford Road in Bassendean, and I just want to ask the council to please consider not taking away the volunteer drivers, service for the elderly people of Bassendean. I mean, this is vital to them, it's more than important, and at this stage of their lives, when they're trying to maintain some form of independence, this is all they have. And it's a social thing as well, and for their mental and emotional, physical health, and for some people, that's all they have. So, please think about this. withdraw the service. It's a hell of a big thing. There's so many elderly people who have nothing else, you know. This is their big thing that they look out for and that they need. So that's what I'm here for.
So thank you. I'm assuming that you're referring, that particular topic was mentioned in 9.3, yeah, the draft public health plan. There was an alternative where the administration were engaging with the 55 plus group to potentially run the service, continue running the service independent of the town. I believe from the interim CEO, Mr. Gibson, that has not come to any conclusion.
Through Madam Mayor, that's correct. Obviously, as you say, the question relates to item 9.3, the draft public health plan, which is presented to Council for final adoption. Council will note in the draft plan that the reference to the community transport service has been removed based on the resolution from the December council meeting and the discussion that also occurred at the November round of council meetings. It is, as staff advised previously, open to council to fund the re-establishment of that service, but to appropriately mitigate the prevailing risks of providing the service, it would require additional expenditure from council. And that is a matter that can be considered both as part of the adoption of the public health plan next Tuesday, as well as the budget process for 23-24.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Seidel, you had your hand up.
I'm going to make a statement about the acoustics of this meeting. People don't attend this council meeting because of the lack of good sound system that should have microphones so the councillors, the staff and the community members can be heard. It was promised 3 years ago in the last count, and it was supposed to be, according to the CEO before she left, would be installed by November the 22nd. It's still not happening. I can tell you now, listening to work, we don't hear it terribly well. You know,
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. I note that that's not an item on the agenda, but you've made your statement, so you have something else, obviously.
Yeah. And I'm hearing it from people that you know, it's no use coming to council meeting because you cannot hear what you've got to say. And I think it's important that everyone does. Anyway, regarding the public health plan, point 9.3, regarding the community transport that meets the needs of ageing population within the town of Bassendean, while the officer report for council held on the 13th of December meeting had this action deleted. Now the question is, will this council decide, should the council provide funding for a community transport service in the future? My view, yes, it should be a part of the public health plan. As part of the future review, many in the community that I've been contacted with have also said that it should be reinstated, even with a third party, not-for-profit organisation with the town, and that should be part of any future review. And then I get down to 9.25 and 9.2, and this is some of the reports in the opposite. It's to promote opportunities for older residents who remain living independently in their home, well-being and mental health be supported. Facilitate opportunities for the active ageing to remain connected and engage with community life, which contributes to a positive and health well-being for these people. So many people have stated that the volunteer transport service enabled them to attend community groups, and I've been hearing this a lot. Now they feel like they're being discarded and not listened to and not feeling a part of the community. stopping the volunteer transport service goes against the town of Bassendean's public health plan. There has to be a provision for it to be reviewed in any future review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So statements, are there any other community members who'd like to make a statement?
The statement I want to make just relates to the point reserve plan.
So that's item 9.4.
9.4. Firstly, I'd just like to draw your attention to something which is fairly new, and I'm not sure if you're across it, and I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to talk about this actually. The Helena River Alliance is a community initiative which has come into existence quite recently, and it's an alliance of about half a dozen, possibly more, community groups who've got an interest in the Helena River, and they've got together with the department at UWA called Waterways, which is about water sensitive design, under a professor who seems to be pulling together schemes for them. Right, so these Helena Alliance people have engaged help through them to get some funding from the Fieldman Foundation fund to put together a load of, and what they call it quite interesting, which I can't read while I'm talking. But basically what they're doing is they're putting together, they're seeing what the issues are out there, and it's a bit of a mess because it's old industrial land, but it's also a lot of it's owned by the state, WAPC, and it's been collected and stuff like that. But there are all sorts of issues along there. And they're looking to put together a load of community-led initiatives which are shovel-ready for the bicentennial of Western Australia. So, 200th anniversary of the invasion, 2029. So this idea about all these projects, they want a portfolio of shovel-ready projects is what they're putting together. Now, I'm not proposing that Point Reserve would become part of that, but I wanted to draw your attention to it because it may be that because when you stand at Point Reserve, you're straight up the Helena coming at you. It may be that whatever they're putting together with the Wajak advisors, and there'll be, that's certainly going to be a project, or at least there'll be projects. Maybe there's some synergy that Point Reserve could be drawn into, even if it's just, a series on the getting placed on the website or a sign actually on site. Maybe the people who are working with Bassendean on these issues would talk to people in the Helena River Alliance about that.
So
I'm just bringing it to your attention.
well, I'll just give you a comment on that. I believe that the Helena River Alliance were having a meeting tonight, which conflicted with tonight's meeting. I was aware of that meeting, and I do know that in a previous submission that Ms Davies made to DBCA's last year, that there was some commentary about the potential to create an Upper Swan Helena Rivers regional park with coordinated projects and funding. So that has been something that has already been on our radar. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And yes, I was aware that that group were starting to create projects and collect. I did read all their stuff that they sent through.
Okay, so I won't.
It's good. It's good.
But also on Point Reserve, just if you do go ahead and not expand the management of the area to the Parks and Recreation Reserve to the north and the south, I just wanted to say that there's a very good chance that the Bassendean Preservation Group would still be prepared to move in, given their current good relationship with the WA Planning Commission and the land that they manage, that is theirs, to do foreshore restoration work, foreshore restoration work. And I just wanted to let you know that that's still a possibility if you decide
Again, thank you for that. I'm also aware that some of the residents in that area are very interested in looking at bush care management of that area as well. So you'd probably get some interested parties to help you in that endeavour. So I've already had people contacting me about that. So
I do have a question, but I don't do have a statement.
okay, so we can move straight on to public question time if there's no one else with another statement.
Okay, but my question is just about town planning scheme 11 and the items that are referred to in the strategy as needing to be amended before the thing gets put out for public comment. And I just want to be clear about what the process is with the items which are in the strategy. I'm talking about the changes to the parks and recreation, the public open space reservations. How will that come together then? Does that mean that you'll amend the map that's going out with the town planning scheme, or you just put it out as part of amendments as possibilities with the town planning scheme, or is it something that will happen after you've adopted town planning scheme? The review of it.
Through Madam Mayor, obviously the Statutory Planning Committee recently approved the local planning strategy, subject to modifications, but those modifications were largely consistent with those that were contemplated and supported by Council in the second half of last year. In terms of the sort of procedural question about what we will advertise, we advertise one scheme map, the draft scheme map, and that is broadly as was presented to Council again the second half of last year, with a series of minor modifications as set out in the agenda item. In terms of Bindaring specifically, if there are references to the 4 lots on Anstey, I'm not suggesting it is, but if that is the case, Council has already made a decision to advertise a draft version of the scheme that provides for all 4 to be reserved as local open space.
No, I was referring to there's mention of a review. Number 46 on the list of things to be changed in the strategy.
Through Madam Mayor, there's a reference in the strategy to reviewing the zonings and reservations for the TPS4A area generally and around Bindaring. What the town will be advertising is what was considered by the Statutory Planning Committee not long ago, but requiring some modifications. So largely those modifications actually exclude any changes to the Bindaring context. What we'll be advertising in terms of the draft scheme will be as per Council's decision for the second half of last year. So the review reference in the strategy just provides the town the opportunity to revisit the issue in light of any submissions. That will obviously need to occur once we bring back a report to Council mid this year with the benefit of the public consultation. So nothing actually needs to change right now, but it will provide Council a little bit of flexibility mid this year to reconsider all the zonings and codings in and around Bindaring in the context of any public submissions. I very much appreciate that's probably a long-winded and somewhat confusing answer, but if it helps, I'm happy to give you a call tomorrow and explain.
Yeah, I've just actually lost the track of, so when it's going out, you want to advertise in March, I read.
Yes. That's good.
So when it goes out in March, what will it say about that? We'll refer to the strategy, and that will just be in the strategy as it's written.
Through Madam Mayor, it will not refer to the strategy so much. It will be a draft scheme text, which will be a word-based document, and it will be a draft scheme map, which will be a plan. And that plan will set out the zonings and reservations and residential codings of all the land in the district.
As it was published with the October meeting?
That's right.
So can I just ask a question on that, subsequent to what Val has asked? If people object to something in that plan and they put forward their objections, but if people are, and that's fair enough, that's feedback, but if people are seeing the that if you've got people who are seeing a map, agree with what's on there and don't provide feedback because they agree with what's on the map, how do you actually balance those people who might object and put in objections?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a good question. That's one for Council to consider as part of its decision-making process. There is an informal rule of thumb, I suppose, that's never really been quantified or tested or formalised, is that if someone chooses not to put a submission in, it is occasionally deemed to be informal support, but there's nothing in the planning system that formalises that view. What staff would simply do is prepare a report to Council with the submissions we did receive. Obviously, we would need to consider that in the context of the number of landowners and ratepayers and residents we have in our community, which is over 16,000. So whilst it's not a numbers-driven exercise, it is reasonable to have regard to the rate of response when considering any response. So if we received, say, for example, 10 submissions and they all objected to a particular aspect, you could couch it that 100% of people objected, but you've got to look at the broader context and say, well, only 10 people of 16,000 people actually had a firm view on it. So it is not an exact science for Council. It needs to consider a number of issues. And like I say, it's not just the quantity of submissions, it's more important to consider the actual nature of the submissions themselves.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to ask a question? No? Okay. And I don't believe we have any deputations. I do have two questions that were sent in. I'll just open up my device. Okay, so these questions are for Mr. Don Yates. The first question: are the Bassendean planning staff and councillors aware of the impacts of atmospheric rivers flooding rain events, such as recently experienced in the Kimberleys, South Australia, Eastern States and Auckland, on low-lying land such as Wilson Street Car Park and the Childcare Centre at the BIC Reserve? And if yes, why is high density being promoted for such sites as listed in the Town Centre Master Plan? Now, a response has been provided by the officers. The council adopted Town Centre Master Plan contemplates redevelopment of both the Wilson Street Car Park and the Infant Health Clinic site in the BIC Reserve at up to 10 stories and 5 stories respectively. The preparation of Master Plan was intentionally a high-level strategic visioning process and did not extend to detailed site-specific analysis of geotechnical or surfacing constraints. It is expected that such investigations will be progressed as part of the future preparation of a precinct structure plan, as well as the preparation of site-specific development proposals. There is a second question that asks if this response will be published within minutes of the briefing session, and I believe that Mr. Gibson has said yes, that will occur. Okay. So with no deputations, we will move on to the reports. The first report is 9.1, use not listed short stay accommodation for 88 Reed Street, Bassendean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider a use not listed short stay accommodation at 88 Reed Street in Bassendean. The proposal will accommodate no more than 6 people at any given time and is supported by a management plan. On-street parking in this location is not permitted given the continuous dividing line on Reed Street. However, there is sufficient space on site to accommodate 2 vehicles. The proposal was advertised with only one submission received from the Department of Education of no objection. The proposal is otherwise compliant with local planning policy number 18, short stay accommodation, with the exception of the site being beyond the 400-metre locational criteria to a railway station or a centre. The town has recommended conditional approval given the site is within an acceptable 800-metre walkable catchment of Ashfield Station and Centre, and given the proposal is unlikely to adversely impact the amenity of the locality.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Councillors, questions? I do have one question. Has there been consideration into providing a temporary 12-month approval just to ensure that they comply with the conditions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in this instance, given we received no objections from any submitters, and given there was a comprehensive management plan submitted in support of the proposal, the town had no cause to believe that there was an issue with compliance with the conditions. But in any instance, the town can use the enforcement provisions of the Planning and Development Act if there is a breach of the conditions.
So under those, if there's a breach of those conditions, I'm assuming that we can withdraw permission for it to operate as that.
We can ensure compliance with the requirements of the conditions either by issuing an infringement notice or by undertaking a prosecution.
Thank you. So the next item, 9.2, Parking Amendment Local Law 2023. Again, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this report presents the findings of the consultation period for the Parking Amendment Local Law, which Council resolved to advertise as its 22nd of November 2022 ordinary meeting. 3 submissions were received, with 1 support and 2 comments. 1 late submission was received, also providing comment. The comments primarily related to the proposed amendment related to Clause 7.6 of the local law, which refers to how a vehicle is lawfully parked on the street. The comments section of the report provides a response to this issue, detailing that the clause provides clarification on when a vehicle will be determined as abandoned or causing an obstruction for the purposes of being towed and impounded. Despite 24-hour notice now being clarified, the town's Ranger Services will continue to attempt to contact the owners of the vehicle in the first instance before it is towed. It is recommended that Council makes the amendment local law.
Councillors, questions? Can I just ask a quick question on that, Ms. Shaw? 24 hours, why 24 hours instead of, say, 48 hours or 72 hours? What's the criteria for 24 hours?
24 hours has been accepted by the Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation for previous local laws, and it's considered to be an acceptable timeframe for the town's Ranger Services to attempt to contact the owner of their vehicle whilst removing a potential safety obstruction.
Actually, I'll just have a quick question if I can, Madam Mayor, and through you to Dr. Shaw. Is there ways in which communication is made, like a phone call 24 hours? Is there a number of text messages? Obviously, snail mail might be a little bit sort of out of whack, but are there different ways in which our rangers are communicating the owners of these residents?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the rangers will door knock on adjacent houses to see whether or not somebody owns the vehicle. If not, they'll attempt to use, if there are plates on the vehicle, to track through licensing to get contact details of the owner of the vehicle. In most cases, there is no license and the vehicle has effectively been dumped, in which case, after the 24-hour period, the local law will now enable us to tow the vehicle to remove the obstruction.
Thank you.
So, councillors, 9.3 is the draft public health plan. Again, Ms. Shaw, this is your item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the draft public health plan following advertising and to review 2 related council policies, being the active ageing and disability access and inclusion policies. 16 submissions were received on the draft public health plan as outlined in the attached schedule of submissions, with the key themes relating to the provision of shade throughout the town, upgrades to walking and cycling paths and associated infrastructure, and provision of exercise equipment. The draft PHP has been updated to reflect new actions in this respect, as well as removal of the community transport action that has previously been considered by Council. Councillors have previously been provided estimated costings to implement the PHP, which have been reflected in the financial considerations section of this report. As identified in the risk section, Council is advised to consider whether it will likely fund the actions in associated years, as there is reputational risk if the plan is adopted without necessary funding to ensure its implementation. As outlined in the report, The two related council policies are recommended to be revoked, given related actions are otherwise identified within the PHP or not required to enable the town to undertake its disability access and inclusion plan, which will occur this year. Further information in this respect will be provided through the bulletin in coming weeks. The PHP is the first of its kind for the town and represents a significant body of work from the town's environmental health services. It is recommended that council adopt the PHP as attached in the report.
Councillor McLennan, followed by Councillor Ames.
Thank you, and thanks for the staff for their work on this. You just acknowledged that it's been a lot of work for the staff, and that's very evident. We've had quite a few emails going back and forth between councils and staff recently about things like the amount of work that we're doing that is potentially also overlapping with state government responsibility. So in here, there's 9.5.5 related to mosquito monitoring control, which has been a big part of our emails. But there are other things. So, for example, 9.3.8 about the town providing healthy eating at schools, and look, I'm all for healthy eating in schools, but I'm just wondering, some of these things, there's something else around cigarette education and so on, but where is the line drawn between what the town funds and what, say, the education department funds or what the Department of Health funds? Because it just seems like more and more there are things that are great and that are necessary, but they're becoming local government's responsibility.
Through Madam Mayor, so for some of the actions identified in the PHP, the town will be working in conjunction with the state government and the Department of Health to deliver the actions. So, for example, with mosquito education, there is a program that is provided by the local. It's funded through our CLAG program, and we can then deliver that in consultation with local schools. But it does require some funding from the town, as identified in the previous costings. And for example, matters relating to promoting healthy eating, the Heart Foundation will provide resources in that respect that the town can also use to facilitate these programs. So there are grant funding opportunities available that the town will seek to use in future, but there will be municipal funding required to implement the actions contained within the PHP. So a number of the items that are already contained within the PHP are already funded through the adopted budget process. So for example, this financial year, for the inclusion of the new actions, there's currently a shortfall of 3,500. So it's open to council to consider the costs associated with each of these actions to determine whether it will drop off certain actions in subsequent years or reduce the years that the action is implemented.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Ms Shaw. Your comment regarding point 3 of the officer's recommendation regarding revoking the council policy, the disability access and inclusion, for the scenario that there's going to be a newly adopted disability access and inclusion plan by the town. Is there going to be a gap within that particular time frame? Because if we're going to be revoking a policy that we've got without actually a new one coming to the forefront, immediately or within a very small time frame of the new plan coming into place, would that not be a scenario that we might not want to revoke that policy before the new one actually is put into place?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the Disability Services Act 1993 requires the town to have a disability access and inclusion plan. The current plan is from 2019 to 2024, so there'll be no gap in which we don't have a date. We're just in the process of starting the review of that date to ensure that we go out to preliminary consultation as required by the Disability Services Regulations 2004. So we'll start that early engagement process similar to what we did with the draft public health plan to seek community sentiment and what actions we should be implementing going forward, with a view to ensure that we have a date in place for 2024 onwards when the current plan expires.
Thank you.
Councillor Plivka.
Yes, for Director Shaw. First, I'd like to talk about money and then about the boundaries of the town. So the total cost of implementing the PHP over the 4-year span is about 7.3 million. If we didn't adopt this plan, how much of that money would we already be spending under different initiatives?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. So under the financial consideration section as identified on page 25 of the report, excluding the cost of the new actions for the following financial year, it's just over $1.4 million. And so that's
how much we have to find.
That's how much money we already have adopted in the budget for some of the programs that were already operating. There was $30,000 provided and adopted as part of the 2022-23 budget for implementation of the public health plan, assuming that it would be adopted this financial year, of which 33,500 are new programs. So the shortfall that we have this financial year is only 3,500.
The other figure, I think the 7.3 is over 4 years.
Yes.
Let's call it the 1.5 is over 1 year. So when we multiply the 1.5
Yes.
by 4,
So
we get to about 6. Is there a shortfall of
yes. So what this plan does is set out actions for future subsequent financial years, and the purpose of providing the costings and that information is for council to consider the financial implications that it would need to consider in subsequent budget years. So in the next year's budget, council will be required to consider whether it allocates a certain amount towards funding those actions as identified within that financial year. The detailed costings for each financial year were provided to council via the CEO bulletin, and it'll be open to council to delete certain actions or push them back to change the amount of money that's otherwise required in each financial year to implement the public health plan.
In broad terms, if over that entire 4-year period there's a difference of about 1.4 million, on average we would have to essentially find an additional 350,000 each year to deliver all of the things in the PHP.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so it would be open to council to either reduce the actions within the public health plan or provide additional revenue sources, whether that be potentially grant funding or increase in rates to cover the cost of delivering the PHP.
Assuming we decide that the PHP that's been put together is eminently sensible and one which we should pursue, that would be the sort of funding that we would be having to obtain from various sources each year over that 4-year period.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have the cost of each subsequent financial year on me, only for this financial year moving forward. So in the report, I've included the total cost of the plan, and I've included the cost for the 2022-23 financial year. So I can provide, it might be through you, Madam Mayor, easy if I provide the cost for each subsequent financial year between now and the meeting next Tuesday for you to be able to see what the cost would be.
Is it a fair assumption that it's roughly the same each year, or does it differ quite drastically?
It differs depending on the actions and the timing of when we would implement them, but generally it is quite consistent throughout each financial year.
Okay, just following on from what Councillor McLennan had to say, so page 31 of the attachments, that's 2.2, the role of the town of Bassendean in public health and well-being. We talk about how we can advance health in a number of ways, and one of the statements there was monitoring the health and water quality in the Swan River and in the urban waterways. Now, urban waterways I understand, but the Swan River, our municipal boundary is the river itself, isn't it?
That is correct. We work with the Department of Health to monitor water quality given the residents of the town use the river. The purposes of water sampling like that is to provide the responses back to the department so we can provide signs alerting the public to any algal blooms or contaminants that may otherwise affect public health of the town's residents.
So if we weren't to undertake that work, it simply wouldn't be done, is that the case?
Most likely, I would say yes.
And so the river, which doesn't form part of any local government jurisdiction, it's state. Obviously, we can't control boats speeding through there, people doing various things on the river. We don't have the power to do that. So we have an obligation or responsibility to monitor the health on account of that being for the benefit of our residents, as opposed to the state, which doesn't feel the need to do so.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't necessarily think it's a case that the state government doesn't feel the need to do so. It's that each local government that has a river abutting its boundary has been involved in the water monitoring program. The impacts to the health of the river aren't necessarily from use of boats throughout the area. They're typically as a result of environmental impacts like flooding upstream. So the town has been involved in the water monitoring program as part of its health program for a number of years and seeks to continue to do so, which is reflected in the public health plan.
To do what we should to protect our residents who are within the town of Bassendean.
using the river, yes.
One might suggest that the state would do so for people within the state. I suppose that's-
It's, through you, Madam Mayor, that is open to interpretation, yes.
So,
Thank you.
Ms. Shaw, I actually have here 4 pages of questions, which I'm not going to ask tonight. And I do thank some of the councillors because you have already touched on some of my questions I had. But I will ask a couple in that I know that there were very few responses, submissions to this public health plan. And I'm just wondering if there's been an analysis of the community consultation and to understand why we only got 16 submissions over what was a 6-week period, I think, for advertising for submissions. Is that about right?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would suspect it was due to the fact that we undertook preliminary consultation to inform the actions within the PHP itself prior to the formal advertising that was recently undertaken as reflected in this report. As part of the preliminary consultation, the town hosted a stall at Hawaiian's Bassendean Shopping Centre. We put the call out on social media, had stalls, and we received hundreds of submissions for the early engagement. And I would suggest that given the draft PHP, the actions that are contained within the draft PHP are reflective of what the community provided as part of that early engagement, there was probably no need for any further responses in that respect.
So my next question relates on page 24 of the agenda, in the second last paragraph. It talks about the reporting requirements and, obviously there are competing budget requirements that this council faces on a regular basis. And I'm wondering if the financial costs of this public health plan were conveyed to the public during any of these consultations. And my curiosity is spiked as to whether if the financial costings had been conveyed to the public, whether they might have provided different opinions about what their priorities are in respect to expenditure of ratepayers' funding. So was that costing provided during that consultation period?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, it wasn't. And the reason that it wasn't is because the town needed to do probably is quite a significant body of research to investigate the actual cost of delivering a number of these programs. And the town sought to seek feedback from the community as to whether or not, firstly, any new actions that were to be included, which we would then go and investigate the potential costs of, and also in terms of the actions that are contained within the plan, the body of work required for the town to determine its costs in delivering them either in-house or through potential grant opportunities. So we needed to see which items would be included and supported by the community and which items would potentially not be supported and therefore removed from the plan before we undertook the detailed costings associated with the plan itself. But it is open for council to, as I mentioned before, delete items within the draft public health plan or push back actions to later years to enable the town to determine further additional potential funding sources. I just note as well, if I can, that there is no actual requirement from the Department of Health to include a specified number of actions within the draft PHP. The actions are simply required to reflect the social determinants of health for the district and the data as provided in the draft public health plan. So as long as the town has provided actions that not only reflect the initial community engagement on the matter and to address the key issues related to public health within the district, there's no set number that the town needs to provide.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask one more question? Sorry. Under clause 2.1, the objectives, I see that one part has been deleted, and that is ensure the town's resources are used in the most appropriate and efficient way to address the public health needs of the community. I was just curious why that's been removed, because it seems to be at the heart of our desire to have efficiency and use of our resources in a very appropriate way. And I wondered why that sentence was removed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The reason that we changed the objectives was as a result of some feedback from the Department of Health when reviewing the draft plan to instead remove objectives that relate to matters outside of public health and to bring it back to purely health-related matters, which is why we included the separate financial consideration section in the report, because funding and budget allocations for the public health plan and future implementation is a council matter as opposed to a strictly public health related matter.
Councillor McLennan.
Thank you for that. I know you've given us the information overall on the costings for the next year if we were to implement the plan as it currently is. If there were particular elements that we were interested in having more detail on to help us make a decision around whether or not to include them, do you have the individual costings for everything that's been proposed?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. We've provided a number of detailed programs that we could implement to relate to each of the particular actions which I can circulate to councillors, because some of the actions that are contained within the draft PHP, it is a strategy, so it's a high-level document, and there are a number of ways that it could be implemented to facilitate that action. So, for example, facilitating opportunities for active ageing at 10.2.16, we've investigated ways that could actually be achieved, which include programs like virtual reality for seniors living with dementia, Life Ball 55 plus, active and ageless, carpet bowls. So there are a number of different programs that we could actually use to deliver on that outcome. And each of those associated programs would have more specific costs. The cost estimates that have been provided in support of the draft public health plan are exactly that. They are a cost estimate, and through each subsequent budget process, we would be able to provide more detailed breakdown depending on what council sought to deliver within that financial year. But the purpose of including those figures is to just provide to council a detailed understanding of the likely cost implications associated with delivering plans of this nature, and it is quite extensive.
Thanks.
If there's no other councillors, I have one more question. So clause 2.2, which Councillor McLean has already touched on, talks about reliance on partnerships with government agencies. This includes environmental health services such as mosquito control. However, as per the emails that have been going backwards and forwards in the last few days, we have become aware that the town is carrying the financial burden, the bulk of the financial burden for mosquito control, not only in town-owned land or town-managed land, but also state-managed land. And I'm trying to actually understand what reliance we can have on these partnerships with state entities when there is such a move towards cost-shifting provision of services to the local governments. And given we're a small council with a small rate base, this does seem to be onerous for our ratepayers. So I'm just wondering how the administration are looking at making sure that this cost shifting to our ratepayers is minimised.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the town is part of a contiguous local areas authority group, the CLAG group, which receives funding for chemicals and materials associated with the treatment of mosquitoes. So as part of our adopted mosquito control program and management plan, we provide justification to the Department of Health on likely costs associated with materials for the coming season. The Department of Health then provides 50% funding towards those materials, which assists us in the treatment program. There is a requirement for Muni funds to effectively fund the mosquito control program. For this financial year, it was $35,000. There's no statutory obligation for the town to undertake mosquito treatment. However, similar to food inspection programs and the like, it is in the interest of the local community if we do undertake treatments. For areas of land that are otherwise controlled by state government agencies such as Ashfield Flats, the town is continuing to liaise with the West Australian Planning Commission and the Department of Lands to enter into an agreement with these bodies to partially fund treatment throughout areas that are outside of the management and care and control of the town. However, I would advise that it is important that the town does at the very least continue to treat areas within its control, such as drains, road reserves, etc. In terms of future funding to provide for that, the Department of Health allocates funding between each of the different CLAGs based on need. The town provides justification through its mosquito management plan, forecasting what its likely resources will be throughout that season based on various factors such as weather conditions and the like. But I would strongly recommend that the town does and council does continue to fund the mosquito control program as it's in the interest of public health for the town's residents.
Okay, Councillor Ames, then I think Councillor McLaren. Councillor Ames.
And moving on through Madam Mayor to Ms. Shaw about this cost, is there not a scenario that the town could say, well, we're going to front up X and that's it, and you can take the rest of state government? Like, is that a conversation that we can have to ensure that we're not overinflating our particular expenses to mosquito program in areas that we don't manage?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So we provide advice through the mosquito management plan, which needs to be adopted and approved by the Department of Health. So we try and justify the amount of materials that we may otherwise need to undertake the treatment, and that includes based on the area of land that we're proposing to treat. So the Department of Health does scrutinise those plans and allocates funding through each CLAG based on the likely need for that particular CLAG area. The town does always try and put forward, I suppose, the worst case scenario to try and achieve as much funding as possible, but there's only a certain allocation of funding available from the Department of Health to be split throughout CLAGs throughout the metro area.
Sorry.
But I don't think anyone is suggesting that we don't treat mosquitoes, more around trying to reduce the burden on our community. But there's been the MOU mentioned, and you may have replied to this in the emails I haven't seen, but and this is tangential to the public health plan, but how have we gone with that? Is there anything that we can do to further advocate for an agreement where our ratepayers are getting a better deal than what they currently might be?
Through Madam Mayor, so we'll continue to advocate and try and seek that agreement with the Crown, effectively with the state. In future years, the Crown will be bound by legislation to treat their areas, but that's not until at least 2025 onwards, and there is a 10-year grace period in which they can start entering into those agreements. So there is a while away before we can push it straight back to the state government. Just going back to Councillor Ames' question earlier, if the town was to only treat its areas and said, this is all we're treating, we're not allocating any more to treat the Ashfield Flats, I would not assume that the state government would then step in and provide that treatment for us. It's likely that those areas would simply remain untreated, which would be to the disbenefit of obviously our residents.
The MOU hasn't really progressed from the state's end, because it's not just about mosquito control, it's all sorts of things in that area.
So, through you, Madam Mayor. So the town, the latest with the proposed agreement for the Ashfield Flats in particular is that the West Australian Planning Commission agreed to go thirds with the WAPC, the town and the Water Corporation. The town then agreed to this approach and went back to the department requesting a copy of the draft MOU for it to review. We are still chasing up the MOU.
Okay. Sorry if we're harping on this, but it does seem a little bit problematic in that I do understand that the administration have been chasing this documentation for 2 years, and you have in principle agreement for those two state government departments to pay a third each, which would reduce our costs significantly. So I guess the vibe coming from the councillors is we're really interested in how this scenario, where clearly we're not getting the funding that is required, not just for the chemicals, but also for the staffing with the major expense. How do the town propose to deal with such scenarios, not just with mosquito control, but many of these other programs that are now being put to us? The funding transfer of these sorts of services to the local government can be extraordinarily expensive. So I'll give you another one here. Objective 1.12 is to increase the availability and accessibility of quality, affordable, nutritious food. Now, I would have thought that that is a state government and also private enterprise. That's their domain rather than the local government. And yet, these are things which are being, whether it comes down to extra education or various programs, it all costs money. So my question to the administration is, how do you prevent this cost shifting to the local government for various programs that is becoming more and more prevalent?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it really depends on the type of program that we implement to achieve the outcome identified within the draft PHP. So, for example, with delivering local nutritional and healthy eating programs, it could be as simple as providing information to our residents on areas or local businesses that provide healthy food. It can be providing pamphlets on nutritious and healthy cooking programs, workshops at the library in terms of providing advice on healthy diets, etc., to address issues such as heart disease. So there's a wide range in terms of the actual implementation for each of these programs, which would have different financial implications. I do acknowledge that there is, I suppose, a sentiment from the state government in the implementation of these public health plans and the requirement under the Public Health Act requiring all local governments to prepare and implement these plans, that it is shifting things that were previously either provided by the Department of Health or simply not provided at all to local governments. As mentioned earlier, it is open to local governments or the town to simply remove a lot of the actions that are identified in this plan because the Department of Health has not specified how many actions actually needed to be included in the plan. The town has prepared the plan on the basis that it's almost providing a best case scenario. These are all the things that we could potentially consider subject to available funding that address the health impacts that have been identified for the town.
So on a final note from me, 2.4, which relates to immunisation, I would suggest that is definitely the Department of Health program. We don't engage in immunisation. So that one, my personal opinion is, and I would ask you, Ms. Shaw, have you ever seen a local government engage in immunisation programs when it's the administration? Well, it's the Department of Health that fund it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the City of Joondalup does, but we would simply be providing advice to residents on where they can go to be immunised, for example, to address that action, but we are open to removing any action that Council considers appropriate.
So, any other questions? Councillor Blifka.
There was a group of local governments who gave it an acronym. What was that acronym?
The CLAG?
The mosquitoes themselves, how far will they travel? Do we have that data?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it depends on the wind conditions, so we typically have them blow over from Belmont.
Right.
Very good. Any further questions, Councillor Blifka?
No, leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Right, and thank you, Ms. Shaw. Very, very comprehensive answers. Councillors, we will move on to 9.4, which is Point Reserve Foreshore Plan. Ms. Davies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of this report is for Council to consider the final options to be considered in the final Point Reserve Foreshore Plan following the conclusion of the community consultation. As you'll know, for the community consultation, we included multiple options and sought community feedback on their preferences. So in determining what's been recommended to include in the final plan, we've considered the outcomes of that consultation, the councillor feedback that's been received, including at the November workshop, the budget constraints, which is outlined under the financial considerations section, and the relative cost and benefit of each option. So the financial considerations section also outlines the relative cost of some of the options, and the report also outlines what's considered to be a priority from the officer's point of view. So that includes prioritising the upgrade of the town managed land before the state government land, protection and enhancement of environmental values, maintaining or improving on accessibility, relocating the playground away from the river due to the tidal inundation and flooding, foreshore stabilisation, and the potential benefits of relocating the car park on improving the parkland design. So the officer recommendation lists all of the elements and options that we recommend are included in the final foreshore plan. However, that would, because we're recommending that we limit to the town managed land, that would mean that 2 of the options are not the ones that receive the highest level of support in the community consultation. If this is approved, the next stage of the project will include detailed design for the built elements and staged implementation, which will be subject to budget approvals. And we would also be seeking grant funding through programs such as the Riverbank program.
Councillors, questions?
A quick one through you, Madam Mayor, to Ms Davies. So what I'm gathering here with the foreshore plan that we've got in as attachment to the draft, there's going to be a combination of these 2 plans put together, right? With some of the elements out of one option, some elements out of the other, or plan 1 and plan 2, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if you look in the officer recommendation part of the report, that lists the elements.
Yep.
And it will be a combination from all 3 plans. Yeah.
Sure. But we won't be able to get, I suppose, a diagrammatic scan or snapshot of this until we actually make an approval through council to have that diagram put together. Is that correct?
That's correct, because otherwise there would be so many different options possible that it would be difficult to produce it beforehand.
Councillor Lifter?
So just in terms of the playground, you're saying that essentially needs to be moved to higher ground. I think you mentioned previously that the reason for that was that when the flood water comes in, you have to clean the sand.
Yes, through the Mayor, that's correct. But also that area close to the shoreline does become inundated in high tide events, and if there's a lot of winter rainfall, the whole area of the lower park is within the floodway and the flood fringe. So in an extreme flood event, it would all be flooded, but close to the shoreline is particularly affected.
I mean, the down at Sandy Beach, that's also a flood area. But how much more susceptible is this area compared to the Sandy Beach playground?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this area is much lower and it floods regularly, whereas Sandy Beach would only flood in an actual flood event, like a 1% or a 2% flood event.
Just winter rains are enough for.
That's correct.
One other question was I think this was something which was an issue for one of the residents that had attended these chambers before, I think, was the planting along the boundaries with the private property. How will that proceed? Is that something which would be done in conjunction with adjacent residents?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would consult with the neighbours before deciding on the final planting locations. However, that was a survey question and more than 50% of the respondents did support that. So that received a relatively high level of support.
The respondents comprised of adjacent neighbours or all respondents?
All respondents.
Councillor McLennan, you have
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple. Just following on from the question about the inundation. I know that there was one particular resident that has been very concerned about us doing any work there because of the inundation that occurs. With what the officer is recommending, are you comfortable that that would be appropriate to withstand the regular inundation that happens down there?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, what we're planning will avoid that southern area that floods significantly, and we are also proposing to move the playground and the car park further from the river, so it would be a better situation than what's currently in place.
Thanks. And the second question relates to the jetty boardwalk options. So obviously the highest number of responses was for the jetty, similar to what was there previously, but there was also a fairly high support for the other 2 options as well. I'm just wondering in terms of the costing and ongoing maintenance. I can't remember exactly, but I think the one recommended was the cheaper option to install. Is there a difference in terms of the ongoing maintenance? And I'm also wondering about if you had the boardwalk along the edge of the river, whether that would reduce some of the foreshore stabilisation that would need to happen on an ongoing basis?
Through the Mayor, I would think a jetty that extends further into the river would be more at risk if there was a flood event. So there might, if there was a flood event, there may be a requirement for repairs that would be greater than for a boardwalk. The boardwalk structure itself may not necessarily reduce erosion, but if you were installing rock or protection behind it, that would definitely assist.
I have a few questions as well. I'm just interested in page 31 of the agenda indicates shade sales for the playground, and noting the topography of the land and that area is in complete shade in the afternoons, and there are a significant number of trees in that area. I'm wondering why we would install shade cloths on a playground that has more shade than most of our playgrounds in the town.
It may not be necessary to include shade structures. That would be determined at the detailed design once the location was confirmed, and it may be possible to achieve the similar shading with trees.
With following on from Councillor McLennan's comments about the boardwalk and or a jetty, and taking on board your comments about a longer jetty being more subjected to possible damage during flood events, I note that the Sandy Beach jetty is a short jetty and it's quite well utilised. Is there potential as an alternative to do a shorter jetty in that area? That would be my first question on that one.
Yes, that would be possible.
Okay. Do you have any possible costings on what a shorter jetty would cost?
It would be consistent with the area generally. So if it was half the length, it would probably be half the cost.
So if we had instead the boardwalk option, which would fit with that area beautifully, if there was a boardwalk with lots of the plantings that go on the foreshore, would that not provide more protection for the shoreline or not? Because obviously the boat wake is a problem for our foreshore.
Because the boardwalk would be above the water level, it would have a minimal impact on wave action.
Councillor Clifton?
Just following on from your question, through you, the jetty at Sandy Beach, there's no suggestion that any flood would wash that away, and it looks pretty robust.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe it may be below the flood level, but it's required to have a marker, just so if there was a flood, that boats could see where it was.
The jetty at Sandy Beach, though, but that, you're not suggesting that would ever wash away, and it seems to be pretty well built.
I'm not sure. I'd have to find out from DBCA.
Right.
Any other questions, councillors?
Make a comment, maybe?
No comments. You're not
Okay.
allowed to do comments.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Councillor Ames.
Frame it as a question.
I think jetties are well built nowadays.
You can make comments after the meeting. So, councillors, we're on to 9.5, which is the draft local planning framework. Sure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to note the continued progress on the draft local planning frameworks presented to Council on numerous occasions, as outlined in the previous report section of this report. The progression of the local planning strategy and scheme has been a matter of priority for the town. In the past 3 years, there has been ongoing discussion and modification to the draft documents, largely at the request of the Department of Planning, to reflect changing state policy positions and guidelines for local planning frameworks. Whilst this at times has been challenging, the town has continuously presented modifications to Council, who have endorsed the changes to expedite the frameworks. The draft frameworks were considered by the Statutory Planning Committee of the West Australian Planning Commission on the 7th of February 2023, where the strategy was endorsed subject to modifications and the draft scheme was certified for advertising, also subject to modifications. A copy of the modifications are attached to the report. The town has updated the documents in accordance with the SPC resolution and is finalising graphic design of the strategy before publishing the document on the town's website. The town is also progressing the preparation of a consultation plan for draft LPS 11, which will be presented to councillors for review via the bulletin prior to advertising occurring. Advertising is expected to occur from April onwards, following which the results of the consultation will be presented to council for further consideration before the scheme is again presented to the SPC and ultimately the Minister for Planning for final adoption. Thank you.
Councillor McLennan?
Thanks. If after advertising there's something that we would like to add in or reinsert, is that a possibility?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it is. There's the option for council to reinsert an item. However, the minister may determine that it requires re-advertising. So as a result of the submissions, the town may determine that it seeks to amend the documents to reflect the submissions that have been received on a particular item. The documents are then presented to the Statutory Planning Committee, who may direct the local government to re-advertise it if it considers that that amendment is a substantial amendment to what was advertised. Alternatively, it can direct the local government to modify the documents before being presented.
So I think we're all aware there's a couple of things in particular that some councillors have an interest in pursuing. Is there a way that we can advertise it to try and get feedback on those things officially, so that if we do decide to modify what's currently been approved, that we've already have the requisite consultation when we submit it back to WAPC?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. So in accordance with the planning regulations, clause 22.1 of the regulations has a pro forma that must be adhered to when the statutory advertising of the scheme occurs. So the town can provide FAQs directing particular attention to certain items that have been included in the draft scheme text or on the scheme maps. However, the town cannot seek it can't ask almost like a survey. There is a pro forma, and all it requires is the name of the submitter, the address of the submitter, and how the scheme itself relates to the submitter. So the town can't ask specific questions to which we would consider feedback to be considered and submitted to the Statutory Planning Committee. It can only provide advice via separate documents as to what's contained within the draft scheme.
If I can just follow on from that. So when you say a separate document, am I to assume that that is the manner in which, for instance, City of South Perth, Netherlands, is that the manner in which they communicated changes that have been made to their draft scheme?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, for example, the town could include on its website the schedule of modifications as directed by the Statutory Planning Committee. It could include FAQs as to why the document that was previously being considered by council and adopted by council for advertising has since changed. But in terms of the actual submission form itself, it can only ask those 3 points. So anyone that is seeking to make a submission would need to read separate documentation and then submit their submission on the pro forma for it to be considered as a formal submission. So, for example, an email from a resident that does not comply with the pro forma and otherwise provides general comment cannot be considered as a formal submission. It must be the pro forma.
Okay, so on that point, are we talking about just online submissions? Because we've got a 25% of our population are older people who are not potentially online. So I'm curious about how we cater for those people who are not on computers.
So the town is also required under the regulations to send letters to every property owner and resident within the district, in which case we can direct them to hard copy forms in which they can complete. The draft advertising in accordance with the regulations that we're looking to prepare to present to council via the bulletin includes copies of the scheme map, FAQs, and any supporting information within Customer Service Centre and the library, a stall at Hawaiians, drop-in sessions, A-frame signs for those drop-in sessions, notice in the newspaper circling the district as required by the regulations, letters to all adjacent local governments, including Bayswater, Belmont, Swan, letters to all service providers, which is required by the regulations, letters to every property owner in the district, identifying any particular changes to their property, any change to the local planning framework page on the town's website to provide additional supporting information. Thrive, we're also looking at as well. Videos to be provided on the town's social media, updates, and the advertising is required for a minimum of 90 days. We're also seeking to provide a briefing session to our customer service centre officers so they can provide advice when there's calls received. And lastly, our GIS officer has built a layer on our interim maps, so members of the public will be able to have a look at the map to see what their property is proposed to be zoned compared to what it's currently zoned under LPS 10.
Yes. So I suppose when somebody's having a look at LPS 11, they can maybe recall the provisions in the old town planning scheme relating to tree protections, and that might trigger them to say, well, there seems to be different protections in the new document, or lesser protections. If they were to raise that with councillors, councillors would be able to say to them, well, there are other mechanisms, there are other local governments that are exploring other avenues, and to assist with that. So, well, if that's something that's of interest to you, put a submission in the pro forma saying that that's something you would like to see.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. And the town intends to include information within the FAQs as to why the previous provisions that were contained in the draft scheme, including changing the definition of development and tree preservation orders, have been replaced with significant tree registers as directed by the Department of Planning.
Okay, excellent. Just going to the strategy, everyone's very interested in the scheme. Page 219 of the attachments. That is items 12 and 13. So this action, consider the future zoning reservation of 19 and 17 Anstey Road, and reviewing the zoning reservations that apply to 17 Hardcourt, 18 Anstey and 29 Highland. My understanding is that the strategy and scheme are running in parallel now. Has that action outlined in the strategy already occurred? And does that find its way into the draft scheme as will be presented, or is that a future action?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the documents aren't running in parallel. The local planning strategy has already been advertised. The modifications as per the SPC resolution for the strategy are to amend that document for final endorsement. So the Commission has endorsed the document. The town is required to make the modifications to the strategy, and it's effectively complete. The actions that are included there in terms of 12 and 13 will be reflected on the draft scheme map, which will be provided for advertising for the community as part of advertising of local planning scheme number 11, before coming back to council for further consideration of any submissions received on the matter, before being presented back to SPC and then on to the Minister for final adoption.
So that's why the strategy has to be finalised prior to the scheme, because these actions will be reflected in the draft scheme.
That's correct. Well, that is the intent, yes.
Okay.
Councillors, are there any further questions on this item? I will just ask one quick question. You indicated that the communications would come out to councillors via the bulletin. Do you have sort of a timeline when that might happen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're intending to undertake consultation from April onwards. So we're seeking to have the materials prepared, ready for council's consideration via the bulletin, ideally from the 3rd of March. But it does depend on the time it takes to prepare those materials, because as you can imagine, it's quite extensive. But certainly as soon as possible, our officers are working on that as we speak.
It would be good to actually have a bit of time to consider that. Okay. So thank you, Ms. Shaw. Very comprehensive responses. Okay, councillors, we now move on, unless there's any other further questions. No? Okay, we now move on to 9.6, the RFT, weed control for environmental weeds in the town of Bassendean. Councillors, do we have any questions on this? Should ask if Ms Davies would like to speak to. Sorry, wrong person.
Through Madam Mayor, just very briefly, it is me, because I'm responsible for the procurement process, but Ms Davey is responsible for the contract that will flow from the procurement process. So the purpose of this report is simply to present the report on that tender process for weed control for environmental weeds. The town's previous contract expired on the 7th of February, and the proposed contract is for a similar scope of work to the previous contract, which is broadly for chemical and non-chemical weed control in natural areas. It's recommended that Council appoints Natural Area Holdings for a contract of 1 year with 2 optional extensions of 1 year each. And as I mentioned before, Nicole can answer any questions about the scope of work and the technical aspects of the contract.
Thank you. Councillor Clement?
Yeah, one question for you, Mr. White, and one for you, if you don't mind. Just in relation to the 1 + 1 + 1, the 1 year seems like a pretty short duration for the amount of work and effort that goes into a tender. Is there a reason why we just do the 1 year contract?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might defer to Ms Davey on that one, because I think that is, in this particular case, just a way for the town to monitor the contract and be very, very clear about what it's receiving in terms of services before it executes the extension. Do you have anything to add?
No, nothing further to add.
And just in relation to the specifics about what has been requested for successful reserve, as you know, there's been a lot of some different opinions on how the natural area there should be managed. Some groups wanting no chemicals, some groups wanting or recognising that using chemicals in the short term may lead to a better outcome to restore that bushland. I'm just wondering where you've landed and what we'll be asking the contractors to do on that particular site.
So through you, Madam Mayor, this contract is based on a schedule of rates. So we don't, in the request for tender, we don't specify exact works required at each location. It's a schedule of rates for different types of activities. And then on a monthly basis, an officer will go out and assess what is required at each site and provide that to the contractor. For Success Hill Reserve, we are looking at possibly having a separate contract because it's a significant Aboriginal heritage site. So it could possibly be put out under a separate contract to sort of manage it by a business, preferably an Aboriginal owned or operated business.
But potentially, if it was under this contract, there'd be scope within the 3 years to adjust what was requested at that site.
That's correct. It's requested on a monthly basis, so it can change each month depending on what's on site and what the priorities are.
Councillors, any further questions on that one? We go to 9.8, relocation of town customer service centre.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we might back to 12.7.
Sorry, the annual report. We can't miss the annual report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is for Council to consider accepting the draft annual report for the financial year ending 30th of June 2022, as is required by the Local Government Act. As set out on page 47 of the agenda, the draft report, excluding the financials, was provided to councillors in November last year with no responses received. Since that time, in February this year, the audited annual financial statements were endorsed by the Audit and Governance Committee. And in considering this matter next Tuesday, Council is also required to set a date for the annual general meeting of electors, and to that end, staff are recommending that the meeting occur on Wednesday the 29th of March this year.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Councillors, questions? I think we can move on to the next item. 9.8, relocation of town customer service centre.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is seeking Council's direction on the future location of its customer service centre in the context of current actions being pursued in relation to the existing premises at 35 Old Perth Road. The purpose of bringing this report to Council at this time is to allow any decision to appropriately inform the preparation of the upcoming 23-24 annual budget and to provide maximum lead time for any requisite project planning. Broadly, as you can see, the report provides for 3 options. The first 2 predicated on the relocation out of 35 Holbrook Road, as is provided by the current EOI process, the Council adopted Townsend Master Plan and the Council adopted Land Asset Strategy. The third option that you can see provides for the retention of the current premises, noting that such an approach would be inconsistent with those considerations and would actually not address some of the practical accessibility issues we currently have. Whilst option 2 is considered advantageous in some respects, on balance it is recommended the Council pursue option 1, being the use of the existing town facilities in Old Perth Road and in Ashfield. Like I say, any decision the Council might make next Tuesday would be intended to inform the budget discussions for the 23-24 financial year.
Councillor McLennan.
Thank you for that. Just in relation to the financial considerations, obviously option 2 is part of the confidential attachment, but I'm conscious that either option 1 or option 2 is still going to require works to be done to this building, and it's clear that the staff need better accommodation here. What percentage of that total budget for either of them would be the works for this building? It would have to happen anyway, independent of which options we choose.
Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. They haven't specifically been costed in terms of what would occur if, in the absence of any sort of move at all. But in terms of this building, you could avoid a lot of the cost if the status quo was retained by just giving it a bit of a facelift and improving some of the staff amenity. But that would sort of also only provide, I suppose, incremental improvement as to what we currently have. Across at 35 Old Perth Road, that facility is a little bit problematic at the moment in terms of staff security for the customer service centre, and the very sort of steep stairs that staff need to escalate to get to the ablution facilities and the sort of lunch facilities and so on. And on top of that, there's no sort of fire egress from the first floor, and the facilities in terms of ablutions are very poor, to such an extent that most staff don't actually use them. They use public toilets instead, which is a pretty poor outcome, I think, for the town and its staff. So I would suggest that, in rough terms, somewhere around probably 40 to 50% of the budget would need to be spent regardless. And I suppose the only other thing I'd add to that is the holding costs of 35 Old Perth Road are around 35,000 per annum. So by staying in that building, that's the sort of operational cost of keeping the lights on and the water running and the building insured and so on and so forth.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this could be directed either to Mr. White or Mr. Gibson. Would there be an opportunity for councillors to review the current staff premise, just so we get an idea about sort of what we're working with, either at both locations? And then also, great question, Councillor McLennan, regarding costs. What current retail space in Hawaiians are town looking at? Just sort of got a bit of a mud map in my brain to find out where it's all happening. Barbers are closed down because of staff reasons, not so you're going to slide in there. But where's it all happening?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly councillors are welcome to tour the facilities, both. I think the previous council offered the same opportunity, so certainly no issues with that. In terms of the potential location in Hawaiian,
if it could be discussed, I'm not sure.
It's a vacant premises. I don't think it's too sensitive, but across the corridor from Subway, generally, if one can picture a particular tenancy.
The old hairdressers?
Oh, I'm not sure. Certainly happy to walk down to Hawaiian with councillors as well if that helps.
Thank you.
Councillor Clifka.
I suppose we'll start with the Hawaiian option, is there any other local government in Perth metropolitan area that has their customer service in a shopping centre?
Through you, Madam Mayor, whether or not it's their core customer service interface, I'm not sure, but certainly there are examples. The City of Armidale had a library facility in a shopping centre. I believe City of Kalamunda is about to embark on a similar situation. So again, whether it's their core front counter interface, I'm not sure, but there are certainly examples of other metropolitan local governments having a presence inside a commercial shopping centre.
I suppose a little longer term, I mean, we don't necessarily want to be in Hawaiian's facilities, we might want to be across the road from them. If there was that opportunity to create a community hub with the football club and others, what's the realistic time frame for that if everybody were working towards the same goal? Would that be 10 years as soon as that could happen?
Through Madam Mayor, I don't think that would be an unfair estimation. We've had discussions with the town of East Fremantle regarding their redevelopment of their football facility. That probably doesn't have the same layers of complication as ours because it doesn't involve their civic facilities. So broadly a sporting community facility, and from project conception to dirt being pushed around, I believe it was about 5 years. But that, as I understand, is a body of work that was the #1 priority for that local government for that period of time.
And going back to the customer interface, under option 1, is it the case that we're going to have essentially 2 customer service areas, and that there'll be one at the community centre and then one located in this building?
Through Madam Mayor, broadly that's what's provided for as part of option 1, is that the library will be able to accommodate the existing library functions, but there would be space allocated for the customer service function that is otherwise located at 35 Oldfield Road.
And a question for Director White. If we got new fit out in this building here, 10 years would be what you would expect to be the lifespan of commercial fit out in any event?
Through you, Madam, yeah, I would expect we'd only be doing it once. Yes.
So we could prepare something which would last on a similar time frame to the time it would take to create this new facility opposite Hawaiian, if that's what everybody were minded to do.
Through you, Madam, that would certainly be the intention of the administration, would be to look at a realistic time frame for the development of the other option that we're talking about, and try and within the budget that we have, find the best setup that we can that's going to last for that period of time.
Thanks.
Councillor Walden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given that we have the potential to make decisions that impact Hawaiians, is becoming a long-term tenant of Hawaiians create a potential for future conflicts of interest or compromise positions for the town?
Through Madam Mayor, that would certainly need to be managed. So as I said, it would not be the first time a local government has struck a commercial arrangement with a shopping centre provider, but that is certainly a point well made, Councillor Whiting, that would need to be actively managed because they, in all likelihood, will be an applicant of something at some point, and that would need to be managed both from a staff point of view and elected officials.
So, Councillor Ames, then I have a few questions.
Just one very quick question. Thank you, Madam Mayor. This might be to Mr. Gibson or to Mr. White. Option 2 considerations, the last dot point in regards to the town's customer service centre opening hours. Yes, if we were to find a tenancy within Hawaiian and not change our opening hours from Monday to Friday, would we not maybe be a trendsetter and maybe open the Saturday mornings and maybe a couple of hours on Sunday? Yes, obviously staff costs and wages will have to be taken into consideration, but instead of negatively impacting community, maybe positively impact the access to our town centre when people are actually going to that as a hub for what they do on the weekends?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly, I think that's the report basically makes the point that unless we changed, that would be the risk. It would certainly be open to the town and council to consider our service offering as opposed to being normally a Monday to Friday arrangement. If we were in a different setting where there was other providers and other commercial tenancies open, say on the weekend, it would certainly be one for council and town to consider. As the report identifies, it's a higher cost but higher service offering, and it would change the way council and town potentially interacts with its community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ames. I actually canvassed that idea about changing our hours 3 years ago. But anyway, move on. Can I just ask, the EOI process for 35 Old Perth Road, by my estimates, is not due to finish until March. Is that correct? It's six-week project.
Through Madam Mayor, I believe it's the 8th of March,
Right, okay.
thereabouts.
Okay. So I'm curious, because we don't know the outcome of that EOI process, I'm curious as to why we might be looking at this item now instead of waiting for the outcome of the EOI process.
Through Madam Mayor, simply that EOI process notwithstanding is a recommended action in the council adopted land asset strategy to vacate 35 Old Perth Road and relocate the customer service functions to other buildings. And that is not affected by the EOI process. As Mr. White has said, we have overhead costs of $35,000 per annum, and again, notwithstanding any EOI process and the outcome thereof, I think one could contend that there is merit in considering vacating the premise irrespective, and that would cease the overhead spend. Obviously, it would prompt expenditure in other town buildings, but those town buildings otherwise require some expenditure. So certainly acknowledge the point made by Madam Mayor that the council is yet to determine what it ultimately does with 35 Old Perth Road. But staff would be, well, if nothing else, council, in accordance with its land asset strategy, should vacate it and relieve itself of the $35,000 per annum cost.
Okay, so moving on to another question. In our land asset strategy, that's a confidential document, we have several land assets which are not generating, they're a surplus to our needs and potentially could be sold. Would it not, asking you to speculate, would it not be possible that if those land assets were liquidated fairly quickly, that they could generate some funds, and together with funds that we already have in reserves, there is the potential to actually build new premises, new facilities. So my question is, have we actually scoped out the potential to look at, for instance, this building a new civic centre here? Have we actually scoped that out?
Through Madam Mayor, no. Short answer would be we've not looked at the option of demolishing the current structure and rebuilding a new building. I would add to the initial comment the liquidation or rationalisation of existing town-owned property. The foreshadowed value, the foreshadowed proceeds of those particular parcels, I don't believe get us very close to the funding necessary to develop a fully integrated community hub in and around Bassendean. There will be information coming to council via the bulletin on an update on one of our small residential land holdings and progress being made in that respect. But I reiterate the point that the rationalisation of the small number of freehold parcels we have would in no way be sufficient to cover the cost of the community hub.
I did mention reserve as well, and also the capacity for the town. There is the capacity for the town to borrow funds as well. So again, my question comes back to, we have this consideration about relocating, but if we were genuine in looking at new facilities, I would have thought that that concept would have at least been scoped out to give council some idea of comparison about what it might cost to build new facilities and, you know, to look at our various avenues of revenue. So that's the question I'm asking. If this has not been scoped out, would it not be wise to do that?
Through Madam Mayor, the direction we've been providing to council strategy, the council master plan, less formal discussions at council workshops, has never contemplated, certainly in my time at the town, broad-scale redevelopment of this facility at 46 to 50 Old Perth Road. There has, of course, been discussions through the Land Strategy Master Plan as part of workshops about the potential to develop an integrated community hub, potentially at the western end of Bassendean Oval, and incorporating the Swan District Sport Club and other functional elements into that process. As the report sets out, there have been some initial inquiries made to the town of East Fremantle to draw on their experience with the DPLH to get some guidance as to development on a Crown land parcel which is reserved as parks and recreation under the Regis scheme. We've assumed some very high numbers based on the development of community hubs in other metropolitan local government areas in recent times, but there has never been any directional request from council or councillors to consider a broad redevelopment of this site beyond some minor refurbishment to accommodate additional staff.
So if I can just carry on very briefly, if the council has certain requirements, would it not be advantageous to scope out what those requirements are and the potential costings, whether it's on this site or down at the Bassendean Oval? I guess what I'm asking for is some idea of those costings, because surely our requirements for a facility would be similar no matter where the location is.
Through Madam Mayor, broadly, I suppose there would be practical challenges in demolishing or building 46 to 50 Old Perth Road and rebuilding them, because obviously we still have to maintain our civic and community functionality. That would not be a problem necessarily at the western end of Bassendean Oval, where there's a reasonably modest grandstand, which has been removed without too much hassle. Staff can circulate some cost estimates that it has drawn from other projects. It's not to be assumed that they are particularly accurate, but they are a starting point of giving councillors an idea of the scale of the expenditure required, and it is not at all insignificant. But certainly staff can distribute that to the board and potentially this report next Tuesday.
Councillor Plifka.
Just a comment, Director Gibson, in terms of if this building was demolished and something was rebuilt, if we did find an alternate location and this building were demolished, would anything necessarily have to be rebuilt again?
Through Madam Mayor, if the question is if we were to build at a separate location and house all the civic functions that we currently accommodate on 46 to 50,
yes,
would we need to demolish?
So if we did, and then we did demolish this building, would we have to build anything in its place?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest the town would not build anything in its place, but rather make the property available to the state government, given that it's a Crown landholding.
Was this land on which this building was built previously part of the Vic Reserve?
Through Madam Mayor, I don't believe so, but I'm only basing that on the fact that it's a separate cadastral parcel and that it is zoned for town centre under the current local scheme. But it may well, many years ago, have been part of a broader landholding potentially.
Thanks.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, on that we will move to 9.9, which is the adoption of the quarterly report ending 31st of December. This is Mr. Luke Gibson again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep this short. This report is simply for Council to note the quarterly report for the period ending the 31st of December last year. The report, as Council will be aware, provides an update of performance against the Council adopted corporate business plan. So nothing more to add, but certainly happy to take questions.
Councillors, questions? Okay, we'll move on to 9.10, which is Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee you. This is Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in accordance with the state emergency management arrangements, the town is required to hold 4 BLEMAC meetings per year. In accordance with the instrument of appointment and delegation for BLEMAC, a quorum for a meeting has at least 5 members made up of various state government, community and emergency related officers. Given conflicting schedules with some attendees and the non-combat nature of inner city local governments such as the town of Bassendean, the availability of members to achieve the required quorum is not always possible. Whilst BLEMAC will still be required to hold 4 meetings per year in accordance with the SEMP, this report recommends that BLEMAC become an external committee of council, therefore removing the quorum requirements and allowing a meeting to proceed despite last-minute apologies from members. Separately, a draft local emergency management committee handbook has been prepared by the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, and the town intends to prepare a report for BLEMAC to consider in future for new terms of reference once that handbook has been finalised. It is recommended that council adopt the officer recommendation to address the quorum issues, as well as determine whether the town proceeds with preparing the new terms of reference once established as an external committee.
Thank you. Councillor McLennan.
Thanks. So I noted the reference to the potential to amalgamate with Bayswater, but that it was resolved at Bayswater not to amalgamate. I'm just wondering whether you've got any insights into why that was their decision.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. There was nothing contained within the minutes from Bayswater. Anecdotally, I understand from our BLEMAC emergency management officer that they were concerned with regards to shared services between the local governments and in terms of potential impacts in future on local government amalgamations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Okay, so the next one.
I'll have a quick question, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
No, that's no dramas at all. And through to Ms. Shaw. Obviously, zero operational impact to BLEMAC in its entirety as it is. And does that then mean we now sort of stand alone within what we do within the town of Bassendean, or are we still open to be able to go and do shared exercises and all that sort of jazz to sort of keep the, I suppose, time frame more efficient with what we do?
Through you, Madam Mayor, everything will remain exactly the same. It's simply a case that where the 5 members that are required to arrive at the meeting to achieve a quorum do not attend for any reason, we can still consider that meeting as a formal BLEMAC meeting for the purposes of meeting the requirements of the SEMP. City of Bayswater is certainly open to continuously sharing equipment and materials and undertaking joint exercises. It's simply a case that they sought to have their own local emergency management arrangements in place.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. 9/11, Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee meetings held on September, November and December. Ms. Shaw, did you have anything to say about these ones?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to receive the minutes of the Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee meetings held on the 14th of September, 30th of November and 7th of December. It is recommended that Council receive the minutes.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on that one? Okay, so we will move to 9/12, which is Audit and Governance Committee meeting. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. The town held an additional Audit and Governance Committee meeting on the 8th of February this year, and the purpose of that meeting was to receive the audited annual financial statements for 2021-22. As we know, though, the receipt of our finalisation of those annual financial statements and the receipt of the complete audit report was delayed through our sort of comprehensive asset revaluation exercise last year. The audit findings were detailed in the confidential attachments to the committee, and management has accepted all findings, and the management comments are also included in the confidential attachment. These findings and the measures to address the findings will be included in the audit risk register for regular reporting through to the committee at each of its regular scheduled meetings. The committee recommended that Council adopt the 21-22 annual financial statements. There's a second confidential item that the committee considered in terms of which was a report of serious misconduct. The committee considered a summary of an incident of serious misconduct report report to the committee on the effectiveness of the processes introduced to support officers in recognising their compliance obligations. Report coming in June.
Thank you, Mr. White. Councillors, any questions on this one? Councillor Flipka.
Just on that confidential report, in the briefing session, can we go behind closed doors if there was other councillors that were not part of the audit and risk committee that might want to ask some questions about that?
We can. What we could do is delay this item to the end and then go behind closed doors if you like.
That'd be satisfactory.
Because we've got other items which we can run through fairly quickly.
Yes, certainly.
And then come back to this particular item, okay? So if you don't mind, we will leave this item for the moment and we will go to item 9.13, which is the monthly financial reports. Mr. White, anything to say on this one?
Three, Madam Mayor, just the normal monthly financial reports, obviously 2 months this time, December and January. Other than that, as per usual.
Okay. Councillors, any questions on these ones? Okay, so we will go to, I think it's the payment figures are next. The accounts paid for November and December, again, no commentary on that?
No.
Okay. Councillors, any questions on those? Okay, we will now move to 9.15, which is the proposal to enter into a lease agreement with Bassendean Bowling Club. And this is you, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is quite self-explanatory and brought to Council at the request of councillors. Essentially, it is to enable Council to authorise a new lease with the Bassendean Bowling Club that departs from the standards within the Council adopted leasing framework while providing for a much shorter lease period, acknowledging the desire of councillors to review the policy settings as they relate to lease premiums. Ultimately, it is open to council to grant a lease for 2 years if it sees fit.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Any questions on this one, Councillor? Okay, Councillor McLennan, then Councillor Ames.
So just to confirm, I understand that there's been communication with the bowling club and they're okay with this proposal to have a 2-year lease at the current term and understanding of council's desire to potentially review the framework. Is that?
Not aware.
Okay.
We know now and this with council to communicate regularly.
Have you had a conversation?
I certainly did with Linton.
And can you give some feedback on that?
His feedback was that, sorry, I actually did think that the administration were contacting as well, but that's okay. I did speak to Linton, it was about a week ago. I did send you a message the night that I spoke to him and indicated that this was coming to council, indicated that councillors wanted to review the leasing framework, but with the budget process, all of that timeline meant that we wouldn't be doing that for some months, indicated that knowing that the bowling club wanted some security, that the terms and conditions in the existing, or not the existing lease, in the new document were to all intents and purposes acceptable. However, because we wanted to review the leasing framework, it was a desire expressed by some councillors to shorten that timeline, indicated that possibly could be 2 years, but I'm only one councillor and it takes 7 people to vote. So told the gentleman when it would come to council. I didn't expect it to be in the briefing document, so at that time I indicated it would be in the OCM documents, but the staff have managed to produce the report, so it's now in the briefing documents, and that was probably the extent of the conversation. So he seemed fine with that. There was no real commentary on it.
Okay, thank you.
Same question.
Okay. So the last item is 9.16, which is the mid-year budget review. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very briefly, the purpose of this report is obviously for Council to consider the adoption of the mid-year review to the annual budget for 2022-23, the current year. The financial statements are attached and the changes to the project budgets are attached as confidential items. It is recommended that Council adopt the statutory budget review.
Thank you. Councillor Clement, are you?
Yeah, just had a quick question. In relation to the new projects, the Old Perth Road and surrounds lighting upgrade, can I just get confirmation on what was actually budgeted for? Because I know we had discussions about the whole street, part of the street.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have got an estimate on repairing the section of lights that are out, running a new cable under there. So it's basically from West Road up till where the lights are out. I can't remember the name of that street. James?
It's not James Street.
Yeah, up to James Street. So we've got a quote, and that budget is allowed for that quote. So
it will address the current problem, but
not the whole street.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay, with that, we have finished the reports and need to go back to 9.12. So with that, we've got confidential items. Thank you. So we'll move behind closed doors. And the recording shall be turned off for confidential business.
Okay, so now that we have dealt with the confidential business, councillors, we've come out from behind closed doors, and I will declare this meeting closed at what looks like 17 minutes past 8. Thank you, one and all.